Started doing it, we started planning it like a month before the show opened or something, you know.
A little bit more than that. It was in July, just before I was heading to the river. So
right.
Well,
so,
first off, what I did is I kind of once Richie said, "Oh, sure," I gave him the task, and then I went to the river. he and Leah and Sandy did a lot of the work, but we picked it up when I got back too.
yeah.
But something else to piggyback on what Richard's saying too is that there were so many people who came out of the woodwork who wanted to help with this because they knew and respected Paul and his work and thought that it was a show like this in Laguna Beach was long overdue. And Marlo Bartels came and helped schlep work up the stairs. Sandra Jones Campbell, who's got a piece over here, she loaned Richie her truck that he promptly destroyed. Oh, no, I guess he didn't. He just kind of dinged it a little bit. And there were a whole raft of people who came. Serge Armando and they owed Richie some favors, so he came and put up the signage. And I must say that, you know, after 40 years of doing this kind of thing here at BC, most of the time alone, it was a real pleasure for me to have your help. and it went like a dream putting it up. And the reception, I think, has been just grand. Students of Paul's have shown up from all over. Friends have come from, well, as far away as San Francisco. I'm sorry, I've forgotten Roger Kuntz's sisters.
Oh, Mary.
Mary Kuntz came down. And
Daughter, yeah.
Daughter, yeah. And so, at any rate, it's been wonderful. But enough about the preparation for the show. We want to find out more about how this man's mind works. So, did you have anything you wanted to ask, Richard?
Well, I do, Paul. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you. The first one is you seem to take your work from figurative to abstraction. So I'm looking at your many of your pieces in the last 10 years, and they actually have imagery in them, but you've hidden it.
You want to know why there's no figures in these pictures?
Yes, I do.
Into the mic, yeah.
Well,
Into the mic, yeah.
One thing I've done as an artist, and is this on?
Hold it closer. It is on. Hold it closer, Paul. Hold it closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't hear very well myself, so am I talking all right? As American? Well, anyway, as a little lad, according to my mother, I was used to lie on the floor and draw on brown wrapping paper that my father and she had bought, and I would lay and draw and talk and draw and talk, and they would roll it up at the other end as I drew and talked. And I'm still doing that. And of course, as an art teacher, I did a lot of talking along with a certain amount of drawing too. But anyway, I never was not an artist according to today's standards. I was, for many years, I just drew because this seemed normal to draw. Eventually, I used to start saving all the cartoons out of the New Yorker, and then I started pasting them up in my wall, or collaging my wall, if you want to call it that, of these New Yorker cartoons. And eventually, as I got into the eighth grade and so forth, I sent some to some of the magazines in New York. So there was a time when I was appearing in the New York Review of Books and a lot of the literary magazine, and even the New Yorker had a pile of my things that they were going to look at again. In the meantime, sadly, Harold Ross died, and they sent them all back to me, and I never heard from him again. So Harold got me one way or the other. But in any case, you can see that the drawing part was very important to me, and to this day, whenever there's a crisis in my life of any kind, or I have stress, I will draw. And usually what I draw a lot of, which you haven't seen in this show, is I draw a lot of women, or portraits of women and all. And my wife, who used to be I used to draw her when she was under stress. She would knit and purl, and my mother also said she did the same thing when she was in a problem. So to me, a lot of this work is semi therapy, and we hope, in other words, also semi-art. I have to get my breath and chew a little bit. So any questions?
Well, you must need a lot of therapy, Paul, judging from the amount of work we have here. So.
A lot of therapy, that's true, you know. But it was, if you look around in here, you'll see there's a lot of things. There's a lot of circular type areas in a lot of these pictures. And one of the reasons I moved to the beach was also I could watch the sun come down. I lived up in Claremont for many years, and I taught college up at the Scripps College and the graduate school up there. So I was away from the sun. At night, we just kind of lose interest, and it would go away somewhere. We never saw it. We never saw it land, you know. But down at the beach, when I came down here, I would see the sun land, and it would become part of the whole thing. And if you notice, that big picture there is one of the pictures I drew during one of those periods, and that started me on a way of working that involved the circular forms over and over and over again, and in a variety of positions and statements. So I have to thank the sun for coming up every day, and it became part of my career, and it also is a lot of fun for a lot of other people. Now, as far as the little collages that happened, one reason was simply physical. I was doing these huge paintings, which are like, this would be middle size of the huge paintings. Is that one over there? That's not one of mine, incidentally. But I got to a point where physically I wasn't able to lug them around anymore in my studio or anywhere else. And a few times I was lying underneath some that had fallen on top of me, and luckily somebody came by and saved my life, I guess. But anyway, the collages came along. A lot of ways, I realized also that the collages were, even when I was putting stuff on the wall as a young boy, the New Yorker cartoons and so forth, that I was making, those were eventually turned into the part of the process of making the collages. Another thing that happened that was very interesting was somebody came out with an invention called Polaroid many years ago, maybe 20, 25 years ago, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And,
50.
And I was trying to make some with, and I kept saying a dirty word, and I would get my finger on them. So I started getting these smudged images and all, and I was about ready to throw one away one day. And I looked at it and I said, that's kind of nice the way that stuff all comes together. So after a number of mistakes like that, I began to realize that I was enjoying making these mistakes on my Polaroid, and then also taking the mistakes and then recovering them and remaking them again into paintings that were small in size, but also they were my own. I was making my own shapes. Anyway, I told my students about it, and I took all of my classroom money and went down to this big department, Walmart or something, and bought everything they had. And I had these big boxes of Polaroids, and I gave those as art problems for several years. Some of my students will, if you come up to them, they'll remember that motive anyway. So here you can see the result of that, and it's the result of a period of maybe 20 plus years of almost nothing but collages being made. And you'll also see there's several themes to them. In many cases, the themes involve metaphysical and shapes and calligraphy that is metaphysical too, although it's fake calligraphy. Even as a little boy, I was making fake calligraphy, and I haven't changed since. But I liked the shapes it made and the design and all, and so I just kind of shrugged it off and kept making them. So anyway, what you see is a result of a long, many, many hours of working and working and working and not working in between certain things, and occasionally doing something bigger. And I do a daily, a weekly cartoon for the newspaper up in Claremont, which I've been doing for I think over 50 years. And that's a lot of cartoons and a lot of supposedly funny ideas that I've done over all these years. So, but I still do that, so I still get my drawing and cartooning in, and I still get to make my little my calligraphy and my metaphysical stuff, and I have a great time doing it all. So anyway, that's part of what I do with my life anyway.
Paul, it seems like you're constantly, deliberately obscuring things in your paintings. Do you do that? Do you do that consciously? I mean, sometimes I looked at there's one image in there, and I figured out after about looking at it 10 times it was a stack of towels, but there was no way I could tell that it was a stack of towels before I started. Do you enjoy doing that, obscuring things?
A lot of things happen just because things are around, you know. There's one picture out there by I named Reinhardt after the artist Ed Reinhardt, and I was with several of you in the audience. We were looking at it, and I remember what it is. It's a shape of a little thing that you paint scraper, yeah, paint scraper. And but the thing is the slogan that I've never forgotten. It says art is art and everything else is everything else. And that's that's how the paint scraper got in there. But also it's an excuse for a lot of things in these pictures. You know, that it's art, you know. And I've got students who use that in their life and I still get letters from them with that quote in it. So Mr. Reinhardt did a lot of good and a lot of bad in his life by inaugurating us to the fact that art is art and that's everything else is everything else. Pick it out. This is genuine water.
It's real water.
I'm afraid of that.
I could put a little gin in there for you. Leah might object.
I also don't hear very well.
What?
It's both good and bad.
So Paul, does your penchant for Buddhism have anything to do with this art?
Get closer.
Does this interest in Buddhism have anything to do with this art?
Oh yeah, it had to do with it, not as, except it was a life. Yeah, thank you. My mother was into the real Buddhism, and as I lay next to her making the fake Buddhism, believe it. And so anyway, art is art, you know. But, and I had one of my wives was very much into it, and I've had there's a lot of artists that are into it in all these different ways too, as you know. It has a lot of art friends, and it has a lot of interpreters too, you know. So my interpretations have nothing to do with following anything real, except the way that it's coming out in the way that day. So in a way, you know, I'm like a little kid that going across the floor, and everything you touch, you look at it and arrange it, and then you go on to the next thing. So a lot of these have a familiarity because they're done in a certain style of it's my particular style, but the message is a universal message. I'm just toying with what I'm doing and it's very much a personal message.
Okay, just going back a little bit to the Polaroids. Is this on?
Yes.
Your newer work, doesn't employ the Polaroids because it's, of course, impossible to get anymore.
That's right, yeah.
But you found a technique of being able to take other images and do the same thing with them. Can you explain that a little bit to?
Well, as he said, you know, that after all of those, well, my students all took over, and a lot of them made their own varieties. I don't know whether you did or not when you were in the class. Did you ever?
No, I didn't, but.
I have better taste, huh? Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, it was a method of getting things started. And there was a time when I was doing all these little tiny pictures that were Polaroid size. Because a lot of them looked real great when I would scrape them and crumple them and glue something on them and then sand them. All the things I did were, they're impossible. And they're not artistic at all, you know. But the turnout is an artistic piece, you know. Eventually, I got away from being locked into the little Polaroid size. There was a time when I was only doing that size for a couple of years, and then a couple of critics got grumpy because it was too hard for them to see in that size, you know. So I made them bigger for the critics' sake, you know. So anyway, it's a development that most artists have that come into their lives, where there's something that comes along that changes their way of thinking at the moment, but they're ready for it, and that's what they are at that moment. And there's almost every famous artist and most infamous artists have areas where they've done certain things, over and over and over again. I was starting to say when I get into real trouble and all, I do drawings of the figure. I've always been good with drawing because it was my major subject right from the beginning, and the business of drawing became very important to me. And so anyway, I do a lot of very pretty women, and some of them are friends, and some of them are abstractions, and some of them were a fleeting moment in my life. And some former students also. That's another book. But anyway, this is a developmental thing. Most artists develop, even though it may not be so big in their lives. Usually there's something that comes along that coalesces and becomes a style, for a while anyway.
The one thing that I see repeated, and I'm sure many of you do too, throughout much of the work, you have this mandala concept that's embedded in this piece and your sun piece and everything.
I finally learned how to spell mandala. Spelling isn't one of my big subjects. Is there anybody in the audience that has anything that they like to?
Yeah, I'd like, well, I figured you were probably born around 1921, is that right?
When she wants to know when you were born. It's a woman asking your age. You can ask her.
I couldn't dare do
Smart.
I'll have to tell you that I just had a birthday on Halloween, and I was born in 1921.
I figured that you were born that year, but okay.
So what's your question?
My question is that when you were in college studying art, that was like the late 30s, early 40s. Is that correct?
When you were studying art, was the late 30s, early 40s?
That's true, yeah.
Okay.
I was off my belly by then, next to my mother. I never even thought about it as being anything special in the early days, because I just did it and nobody stopped me. My father was a cartoonist and an artist, and he was also a Renaissance man, and he was an editor of magazines and all this stuff. So, when I was 11 years old, he went away and never came back. So I think that's one of the reasons I tried to do everything that he did. And I was going to do it better and tell him what I thought of it.
Well, my question is, so when you were in college studying art,
Yeah. Yeah.
20 years after the Armory show, or 25 or some years. So was modern art, you know, the early days of modern art, or the mid-century, you know, Picasso and Braque and all of that, did that influence your art, and does it influence it to today?
Yes, I think everybody is attracted by the curriculum. Whether they like it or not is beside the point. You know, but also I'm of a generation that went in the Second World War. Yeah. We came back and we had this miracle of the GI Bill. So I got to go to school, and even married with a family and children, and they paid for all of my bills and my education for over 4 years. And many of my best friends were in that same group too. You know. But what you get out of style is either you do what the teacher has in mind, or you do the exact opposite outcome, which is kind of interesting. As a person who's been a teacher in graduate school and in undergraduate schools, I've had a lot of these little troubling problems come up every so often when somebody would say, "I wouldn't draw that if my life depended on it," you know. Would you like to get out of class and never come back? That didn't happen very often. But schools have curriculums. Excuse me, somebody behind your...
Paul, were you always younger than I am? I'm Emily Dessenberg.
That's Emily Dessenberg. That's Emily Dessenberg, and we could ask her age, but we're too polite to do that. So she wants to know if you were younger, if you were always younger than she is. Tough question.
I don't know what kind of a deal I'm going to get.
I wouldn't touch that one with a 10-foot pole either.
Emily has been a very big part of my life in a strange way. She always comes up with questions like that, and even more attractive sometimes. But the business of a curriculum of a school is usually set by the people at the top, you know, and then they hire people that are kind of go along with it, that are ingenuous with their way of looking, or some that are not that way on purpose too, you know. So I was involved with Mr. Millard Sheets and a whole bunch of that whole group. There was a whole bunch of them up, particularly in the Claremont area where I grew up and was a student for many years, and then I stayed on as a professor in both undergraduate school Scripps and also and I married both a Scripps and a Pomona girl, just to show you how I kept things. But anyway, teachers are good if they can also get the student to start thinking a little bit, and that's one of the hardest things to do, because you're trying to be loved and understood. At the same time, you want to be different. So the being different part sometimes can become very, very awkward. It can also become a breakthrough that somebody never had before too. But it's a very, very tough thing to talk about, the arts. It's always helpful if you drink a little bit along with it too. You know?
There's plenty of wine out there.
Paul, I do notice that some of your artwork and also your personality has to do with being in the now. Is that something that's important for you?
That is, yes, it is. And the now is the news and it's a new theme, I guess. And there's a book out called The Now, and this has to do with the mixture of Buddhism and Christian Science and whoever is walking by the door at the same time. But I found it what I can do is I can ricochet off the words and make them into art words, and that's part of the glory of using the written word and then being able to translate it. I was reading my now book before I came over today, so don't test me on it too hard.
Any other questions, anybody from the audience?
Well, yeah,
Or didn't get your
I
question
didn't
asked?
get
Oh,
asked.
sorry.
I wanted to know, when you were in school, who were your favorite artists, and how did they inspire you and influence you? I mean, like European artists or New York artists.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm hesitating because there's a lot of artists that are my favorite artists,
Well, maybe
and some of them
yeah.
because of their philosophy and not their art. Some cases because of their art and a combination of their art and philosophy. But most artists have something to say. You know, they may not say it very well, as I'm proving to you right this moment. But they use the word and the written word and the drawn passages too. You know, the painting. So what you're trying to do in many cases, and I am in my way, is to test my taste against your interest possibly in my taste. So when you walk around here and you like things, well, that's very, very lovely to hear, and it's very. And it's part of the reason that I'm happy as an artist when I get groups of people like this that actually, you know, might enjoy it on the similar level that I do. You know, many of them here are also artists in themselves, which is even more glorifying to have them around you at this time in your life. You know. After all, I am now 92 years old.
3. You just had a birthday, remember? It's 93. So. If I may add something to that, and hopefully you guys have some questions too, but you were at an interesting time period that Liz is talking about when you were studying, but you also ran with an interesting crowd, I understand. Ran with an interesting crowd, both in the Claremont area, and then when you came down here, you used to frequent the White House when the Interlandies were there and a few other characters. You've told some tales about that.
Well, that's true too. There was a lot of the people that were in my age group and were in the same situation I was going on the GI Bill and all. A lot of those people remained friends all my life, and almost everybody of a certain age in most of the school systems have groups of people that had the same relative background, and they had lots of things in common in their styles and also in their method of working. So, but there was many of them. Millard Sheets' group was one of them. There was a whole group of people like Phil Dyke and Rex Brandon. That became very popular in Claremont and in the beach area. I also had, Millard Sheets was also a person who got a lot of us professional jobs, and I did jobs with Tony DeLapp, who was another member of this group. We did banks, and we did Broadway stores, and we did...
Rob Banks?
Roger Armstrong and Phil Interlandi and...
Roger Armstrong I knew we were both in Pasadena City College together at one time, and we were both cartoonists.
Passion for the river. In fact, for the water, I should say. I'm the river, you're the ocean. Is that a theme that we find in much of your work, as well as the...
I don't know that I'm turning this on or off.
Hold it that way.
Huh?
There you go.
Is that better?
That's
okay.
better.
There was a period when in $60,000 anyway, so you can't take part of it home.
Sounds like pikers to me. So. Yes.
Did you ever spend any time with Walt Disney at his shop?
I have to get it.
Did you ever spend any time with Walt Disney?
I wanted to.
Hold it like this, Paul. Hold it like that. Point it towards you.
Thank you. I'll learn yet.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I wanted to, but there was a lot of things about them I couldn't rationalize. And one of them was the pay was very low. And another one was there's a lot of I was into politics quite a bit in those days, and they were the wrong politics. That's when I didn't make any big Disney money.
Your teaching experience, if I may, you taught at the Laguna School of Art when it was the School of Art. Was that your first teaching position,
No,
or?
no, no. It was one that there were 3 or 4 of us who were on that early days. Kuntz and Zajac, and there was a bunch of guys that were in there. But no, it was and I have a granddaughter here who is here tonight who is going to be taking that class this fall. Isn't she there back there somewhere?
She's in the front row, right
She's
here.
in the front row. Okay, stand up
And
here.
Bryce is going to be going to the college part.
Yeah, she's already an artist, a good artist, and a very, very lovely relative to have.
But you taught at Otis at one point?
Yeah, my mother was a Pasadena's and grew up in Pasadena as I did. But one time my brother and I, who was a veterinarian, and a millionaire, we married a millionaire divorcee, and he was also a good veterinarian. But my mother was standing, and I have a sister too who was a professional model. But anyway, my mother was standing with her 2 sons who were a lot taller than her. She was about 5'1", at a restaurant waiting to be seated one day, and my brother said, "What are you, Mother? You're smiling. What are you smiling about?" She said, "I'm here with my 2 sons, one an artist professor and the other one a doctor millionaire, and that's so great." And he said, "How about your daughter Jean?" "Oh, her." That's the way my mother put the arts. Anyway, she loved the arts. She loved the fact that her male sons did them. That was pretty funny. You can also see that there was a time maybe that I should have gone into cartooning and left this art stuff alone. Okay? Maybe so. I guess not. I don't hear any applause.
We collect all of your artwork that you send as little postcards in the mail.
How many of you get Paul's mailings and save them all? Absolutely. Yeah, I've got quite a collection of them too. So.
Yeah,
Well, 50 years you've done one cartoon a week for the Claremont Courier?
yeah, at least one. Yeah.
At least one, okay.
The guy came into town one day when I was a young graduate student up there, still going to school, and this guy had come out. He just got his journalism degree over at UCLA, and he came in and said, "I'm going to buy this newspaper here in town." And I said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Oh, yeah." I said, "That's a lot of money." He says, "That's $1,200, and I don't know where I can get it all." So anyway, he bought the newspaper for $1,200 supposedly, and it's now a very fat, happy paper. And I've been delighted to do a cartoon in there every week, at least one. And sometimes there was a time when I did an awful lot of them when I didn't have very many advertisers, so I filled up the space.
Well, didn't Claremont recently have a show of your cartoons?
Oh yeah, they had a show. They called me a Renaissance man, which I can't spell, but
You don't have the cartoons bound and on display at any point before the show closes here? Is there any plan to see the cartoons all bound and on display in some way, or that's probably too much?
Did you hear?
You said, do you have any kind of a bound archive of your cartoons that you could bring down that people could see?
No. I illustrated 2 or 3 professional books over the years that were, and those of you who know who Richard Armour was, I did a group of Richard Armour's books, and one of them was called the Academic something or others, and then I did one for the yacht club called "A Pound of Pluck is Worth a Ton of Luck," which is one of the mottos of the yacht club. And that was, and I did all those, I did cartoons for them for every month for all these years also. So whenever I'm in doubt, I draw a cartoon.
I heard some story that when the Claremont Courier was going to participate in the cartoon show, that they no longer had all of your early cartoons, and you had to do a search mission to find them, that they had not been archived?
Well, a lot of them are can be taken home by members of the press if they want them. So I think an awful lot of them were lying in piles, and a lot of them, the piles got shorter. But anyway, it was very flattering to have your originals stolen from you, a bunch of civilians.
Leah, you?
Yeah, Paul, of course, we go back a long way for the days of chasing me down the beach.
Ooh.
My first art instructor. when I was 15.
Leah Vasquez.
But, yeah,
Leah Vasquez is asking a question.
She's accusing you of chasing her down the beach. Oh,
Yeah.
deny.
I've forgotten all that. But where do you get, where do your cartoon inspirations come from? Anything, everything? And do they interrupt you in the middle of doing something else that you get this idea?
Well, cartoonists are never off duty. You know, they're like guerrilla fighters. You know, everything is subject to the words, the way people act, the way they put their hands, the way they lean against stuff. So most of my work is like and it's true. So I think I'm still chasing you. You know.
Yeah, I know. Thank you.
I think she's slowing down, Paul.
But so is he. So.
I'm just waiting, that's all. Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
There's a little story too that when I first broached the subject with Paul about doing this show, he mentioned the idea for a cartoon that he had. He normally did talking animals, as you all know, and a lot of desert island things that you may have seen in the past. But he said he had this idea for a new one of 2 or 3 eggs talking with each other, wondering what they were going to be when they grew up. And I said, you got to finish that, Paul, and we'll use it for the show. And of course, you may have gotten the notice on that from that. That was
in the mail, yeah.
Who knows where the ideas come from?
Well, the thing is, this is about art too, I guess. But to be a cartoonist, you have to have a subject that people are familiar with. And then what you do with the familiarity of that is that you twist it. And so then it's absurd where the thing, because the 3 eggs ended up on your art card, you know. Another one of my favorite ones, and I could make a lot of money with this one, was desert islands. Almost anything you put on a desert island is funny just because it's so ridiculous. I've paid for cars, but just all of the cartoons I've done with those, including some cartoons too. Talking cars, you know. And it's amazing what talks when you're a cartoonist. Worms, amoebas, everything. It's fun. It's a lot of fun, though. I'll have to admit that I get a lot of nudging and winks from people that see my cartoons, and particularly in the Claremont area.
The little fish getting eaten by the bigger fish that has the bigger fish coming along and bigger teeth.
Yeah, that's another good one is fish. Yeah, fish are good. I had a lot of fun. A lot of fun with fish. Go ahead.
Our Father who art in heaven. I'll go ahead. Okay, Paul, I remember a story you told one time about you and Roger down at Crystal Cove, in which I think somebody went out and you guys all got drunk, and somebody went out and stole your boat. Did that happen? Or did you steal Roger's boat, or remember?
They
parked offshore there?
Well, the boat,
Point it towards.
I think a boat got tipped over, and it was being brought up on shore, and the owner wasn't around because they got all wet and they wandered away somewhere. So what I think Roger Coons, who was one of the was there at the time, there were 4 or 5 artists that were in residence at the Crystal Cove, the little buildings there, very carefully took a pen and a ruler and all, and he drew a great big, he drew and painted with a great big crack in the boat. It wasn't there. So and Roger hadn't seen the boat since he had gotten out of the boat. So when he came out and saw it the next morning, he got this great roar, first of anger and then later on of laughter, because it was such a good, beautiful drawn thing. That was having fun with your art, if you can call that fun.
Did you ever do it? I know that Doug McClellan did a lot of them. Did you ever do any stuff with driftwood from down in those days? And did you make much art with driftwood from around here?
Who?
Driftwood.
You know, the guy that hangs out.
Not a person. The wood that drifts up on the beach. Flotsam and jetsam. Flotsam and jetsam.
I haven't made it. I've done some. Anywhere you can bend over and lift something up and you can carry it is what a good collagist can do. And I did quite a bit of that in this particular beach, I'll have to admit. But it's also there is things that you can buy and things you can also appropriate. I think is a good way of putting it. But well, what it is, it's part of a message, and you can see it in another form. You see, so a lot of the fun of being an artist of any kind is looking at something and seeing it maybe for the first time that it's being seen that way, or at least you have never seen it that way. So it's yours and theirs when they see it, and if they enjoy it, then that's a marvelous thing for both of you.
You mentioned one time in this regard that one of the people, actually you said many of your students will bring you things that they see your art in. They'll find objects on the beach, on the street, wherever and one of the people who was pretty consistent in doing that was John Stokesbury, who would travel and he'd come back with bags of things that have found their way into arcane, strange little oddities.
Well, John Stokesbury was very well known young artist. He still lives in town, and he married one of the artist models that was here working in the area. Well, anyway, one day he came up to me in his car when I lived over and around Went Terrace over there. He squealed up to a stop, and I was sitting out by my mailbox, and he came out, he made his hand, he said, "Here, open up your hand." And I did, and he put something in my hand, and then he drove off. He says, "Here, for your collages." Well, anyway, it was a little piece of metal that was beautifully made, and it ended up in a postcard-sized collage hanging over my bed right now.
But many of his pieces, he's brought lots of things.
A lot of people will see stuff. I saw stuff that you'd love. I said, "Why didn't you bring it to me? It was too big."
Well, I think we've gone on, unless there are any other...
I just wondered, Paul, whether or not you had any interaction with Leonard Kaplan, who also did a lot of collage work, or with Keenholz, who lived out in that Crystal Cove.
Did you have any dealings with Ed Keenholz or
Lenny Kaplan.
Lenny Kaplan, yeah.
Lenny Kaplan, I lived quite near, and I liked his stuff. He had he used to have this great store, you know, with all this modern, with collages and mixed in with antique materials and a lot of things. And I bought a lot of little things from him. His price range was pretty good with other artists, as he was also an artist. But he was but he was a very successful man, and that was a great thing for the town. And people would come from all over to go to to see his stuff. He had very good taste and very unusual taste. He also had a lot of girlfriends, and he's
Who looted him, by the way?
He married many of them, as you may know. But what about Ed Keenholz? Were you acquainted with him?
I never knew Keenholz very well. We just walked by and kind of ignored each other. He was a good artist, though. I have to admit, a good artist.
Is any?
You know, Paul, all these iconic artists, including you that you knew, you probably have a great story about all of them. Rex Brandt, Bill Dyke, Millard Sheets, and probably maybe you can't give us all a story about each of them. But what about this idea of Milford Zorns? I see that fantastic mural in the Claremont post office by him. I think WPA project. What about the role of government in helping artists?
Yeah. Well, that was a very, very big thing that helping the artists. And a lot of people were benefited from that. I didn't benefit from that as much as a lot of people I knew, but that was very big. We most of my generation got our education out of, as I mentioned before, the GI Bill was a very important thing for a lot of us, and some of us made some of our best friends by going to all these different schools around, and it was really, really very important to a lot of us. I used the word miracle one time about it, and somebody said that's a good word because it was a miracle to have all these millions of young men back from a war that saved it, that they didn't get shot in, and being able to go to school and turn out to be good American citizens, and some of our teaching, some of the best teachers we had. Right?
Right. Whatever you say, Paul.
Whatever I say.
Roger, you have another question?
Could I ask Paul one more quick follow-up? And it's not a fair question. You're a Renaissance man. You're a teacher.
You're a Renaissance man.
You're a teacher. You're a cartoonist. You're a sailor. You're a mixed media artist. When you're in the groove, is there any one of those that gives you the most satisfaction, the most fulfilling?
I'm pausing. I really don't. I think it varies. The physical thing of doing some of these things is not very exciting. A lot of it is just gluing things down and then waiting for it to dry and carrying something and not slipping and falling with it in your hand. But I would say, surprisingly, one of the most fun things I have is one of the earliest things I did, in which I mentioned that is used as my stress thing. Like when I'm drawing and painting a drawing, when I'm drawing from nature or even from just an objects on a table, there's something about that I feel that that's one thing that I really know how to do, and I'm secure with it, and so whatever my problems are that I'm worried.
I can do that, yeah.